The screaming cut through the summer afternoon like a blade through silk. Children playing under the community sprinklers froze mid-laugh as Karen Whitmore's voice rose to a pitch that could shatter glass. Her manicured finger jabbed at 10-year-old Bella Martinez, who stood dripping wet in her modest one-piece swimsuit. Confusion and terror written across her round face. "Take it off right now. You're violating community standards and traumatizing these innocent children." The other parents gathered around the communal green space stared in horrified silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The sprinklers continued their gentle arc, casting rainbow prisms in the dying sunlight. But the joy had been sucked from the air, like oxygen from a vacuum. Bella's lower lip trembled. Water droplets fell from her dark curls onto the concrete, each drop hitting the ground with the weight of a child's shattered innocence. Her swimsuit, a simple navy blue one-piece, with modest coverage that her mother had carefully selected, suddenly felt like a scarlet letter under Karen's withering glare. "I don't understand," Bella whispered, her voice barely audible above the mechanical whoosh of the sprinkler system. "What did I do wrong?" Karen Whitmore, HOA board president and self-appointed guardian of Maple Creek Commons moral fiber, stepped closer. Her perfectly pressed khaki shorts and polo shirt bore the official HOA logo, a badge she wore like armor. At 52, she had spent the last decade turning homeowners association meetings into personal tribunals, wielding rulebooks like weapons, and transforming neighborhood disputes into crusades. "Don't play innocent with me. Young lady, your figure in that inappropriate attire is clearly visible to all these families." The HOA bylaws, Section 4.7, clearly states that all recreational activities must maintain community aesthetic standards. The words hit Bella like physical blows. At 10 years old, she was already acutely aware of her body in ways that most children shouldn't be. The gentle curve of her developing form, the softness that her pediatrician assured her mother was perfectly normal, suddenly felt like a crime under Karen's accusatory stare. Mrs. Patterson, whose 7-year-old son Jake had been playing Marco Polo with Bella just minutes before, took a tentative step forward. "Karen, she's just a child. She's wearing a perfectly appropriate swimsuit." Karen whirled around, her bob haircut swishing with military precision. "Helen, I've warned you before about questioning board decisions. The standards apply to everyone, regardless of age. We can't have our community space turned into some public beach where anything goes." The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the concrete hot under bare feet. Bella shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of every eye upon her. The other children had stopped playing entirely now, clustering near their parents with the instinctive recognition that something terrible was happening. Just 30 minutes earlier, this same space had been filled with laughter. Bella had arrived at the community park, as she did every Tuesday and Thursday during summer break, her mother dropping her off on the way to work with a kiss and a reminder to drink plenty of water. The sprinkler system activated automatically at 2 o'clock, transforming the large green space into an impromptu water park where neighborhood children of all ages could cool off during the scorching Arizona heat. Bella loved these afternoons, unlike school, where playground politics often left her feeling isolated. The sprinkler park operated on simpler rules. Kids ran through the water, played impromptu games of tag, and built temporary friendships that lasted until the next day. Her swimsuit, purchased specifically for these community gatherings, had never been questioned before. Her mother, Maria Martinez, a successful civil rights attorney specializing in discrimination cases, had chosen it carefully to ensure both comfort and modesty. But now, under Karen's relentless scrutiny, that same swimsuit felt like evidence in a trial where Bella didn't understand the charges. "The rules are the rules. Karen continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her word be final. Either she covers up appropriately, or she leaves. I won't have our family-friendly environment compromised by inappropriate displays. Mr. Rodriguez, whose daughter Anna often played with Bella, found his voice. Karen, what exactly are you saying is inappropriate? She's wearing more coverage than most of the adult women who use the pool. Karen's face flushed red, clashing with her meticulously applied foundation. Miguel, I shouldn't have to spell this out for you. Some body types are simply more distracting than others. The community bylaws exist to protect our property values and maintain our standards. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Several parents exchanged shocked glances, finally beginning to understand the true nature of Karen's objection. This wasn't about inappropriate swimwear. This was about a woman who couldn't bear to see a child whose body didn't conform to her narrow definition of acceptable. Bella's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with the chlorinated water still dripping from her hair. At 10 years old, she was beginning to understand that her body would be scrutinized, judged, and found wanting by adults who should have protected her instead. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just want to play with my friends. Karen showed no mercy. Then you need to cover yourself appropriately. Remove the top portion of that suit and put on a proper cover-up. Or leave immediately. Those are your options. The demand sent shockwaves through the assembled parents. Even those who typically avoided confrontation with the notoriously difficult HOA president were stirring uneasily. The idea of forcing a child, any child, to partially undress in public crossed lines that decent people didn't cross. Mrs. Kim, whose daughter Sarah was Bella's closest friend at the park, stepped forward with newfound courage. Absolutely not. You cannot make a child remove her clothing in public. That's completely inappropriate. Karen's eyes flashed dangerously. I'm not asking her to remove her clothing. Susan, I'm asking her to remove the inappropriate top layer so she can wear something more suitable underneath. It's a reasonable accommodation for someone whose proportions make standard swimwear unsuitable for family viewing. The euphemisms couldn't disguise the cruelty. A 10-year-old girl was being body-shamed by an adult in a position of authority, demanded to partially undress in front of her peers and their parents because her developing body made someone uncomfortable. Bella looked around desperately for help, for someone to tell her this was all a misunderstanding. But the adults seemed frozen, caught between their instinct to protect a child and their fear of Karen's retribution. HOA disputes could drag on for months, resulting in fines, legal fees, and neighborhood warfare that made daily life miserable. I don't have anything underneath, Bella said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the space. This is all I brought. Karen's smile was sharp and cold. Then perhaps next time you'll think more carefully about appropriate attire for community spaces. For now, you can either find something suitable to wear, or you need to leave. The sprinklers continued their rhythmic rotation, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath them. The water that had moments ago represented joy and childhood freedom now felt like a spotlight illuminating Bella's humiliation. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make her body smaller, less noticeable, less offensive to Karen's sensibilities. That's when Jake Patterson, all of 7 years old, surprised everyone by speaking up. Mrs. Whitmore, why are you being mean to Bella? She didn't do anything wrong. Karen turned her attention to the boy, her expression softening into the fake sweetness she reserved for children she considered appropriate. Jake, sweetie, adults sometimes have to make decisions that children don't understand. We're just trying to make sure everyone feels comfortable and safe." But Bella doesn't look comfortable. Jake persisted with the brutal honesty of childhood. "She looks sad and scared." From the mouths of babes, the 7-year-old had cut through all the adult euphemisms and bureaucratic language to identify the simple truth: an adult was making a child suffer. And it was wrong. Karen's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the ugly truth beneath her community-minded facade. "Jake, that's enough. This is an adult conversation." But Jake's words had broken some invisible barrier. Other children began to murmur among themselves, and their parents started to stir with something that looked like collective shame. They had been standing by while a child was humiliated, and it had taken another child to point out their moral failure. Mr. Thompson, whose family had recently moved to the community, found his voice. "This has gone far enough. Karen, you're traumatizing a child over a perfectly normal swimsuit. Where in the HOA bylaws does it specify body type restrictions for recreational activities?" Karen's eyes narrowed. She wasn't accustomed to having her authority questioned so directly, especially not by newer residents who hadn't yet learned to fear her retribution. "David, I've been managing this community for over 10 years. I think I know how to interpret our standards better than someone who's been here for 3 months." "Then show me." David pressed. "Show me exactly where it says that a child's body type can disqualify them from using community facilities." Karen fumbled with her phone, pulling up the HOA app with its digital copy of the community bylaws. Her fingers scrolled frantically through sections on noise ordinances, landscaping requirements, and parking restrictions. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could be reasonably interpreted to support her demands. The silence stretched on as Karen searched, her face growing redder with each passing second. Finally, she looked up with the desperate expression of someone whose bluff had been called. "The spirit of the law is clear. Even if the specific language isn't explicitly stated, we maintain community standards through collective understanding of appropriate behavior." It was lawyer speak designed to obscure the absence of any actual rule violation. David Thompson shook his head in disgust. "So you're making up rules as you go along to justify harassing a child? That's what you're telling us." Bella, who had been listening to this exchange with growing confusion and embarrassment, finally reached her breaking point. The tears she had been holding back began to flow freely, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight of a child's genuine distress finally galvanized the assembled parents into action. "Mrs. Patterson knelt down beside Bella, wrapping a towel around her shoulders, not because her swimsuit was inappropriate, but because she needed comfort and protection from Karen's continued harassment. "Honey, you haven't done anything wrong. Your swimsuit is perfectly fine, and you have every right to be here." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "Don't undermine my authority. Helen, I am the HOA president, and I have the responsibility to maintain community standards. If you don't like how I run things, you're welcome to run for the board yourself." It was a threat Karen had used many times before. Most residents found the idea of dealing with HOA politics exhausting, and were content to complain privately rather than challenge her directly. But something had shifted in the dynamic. The blatant cruelty toward a child had crossed a line that even conflict-averse neighbors couldn't ignore. "Maybe we will," Miguel Rodriguez said quietly. "Maybe it's time for some changes around here." Karen's eyes blazed with fury. She had built her power base through intimidation and the apathy of busy parents who didn't want to deal with HOA drama. But now she could sense that foundation cracking. "Fine, if that's how you all want to play this. Remember that I control the community budget, the maintenance schedules, and the violation notices. Cross me, and you'll find out exactly how unpleasant life in Maple Creek Commons can become. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone present understood the implications. Karen had the power to make their lives miserable through selective enforcement of arcane rules, delayed maintenance requests, and harassment disguised as official HOA business. But as Karen stood there, savoring what she assumed was her moment of triumph, she failed to notice the BMW sedan pulling into the parking area 50 yards away. The driver, a professionally dressed Latina woman in her late 30s, stepped out of the car and began walking toward the sprinkler area with purposeful strides. Maria Martinez had finished her court appearance earlier than expected and decided to surprise Bella by picking her up early from the community park. As she approached, she could hear raised voices and see a crowd of adults gathered around the sprinkler area. Her maternal instincts immediately went on high alert. She was close enough now to make out individual voices, and what she heard made her blood run cold. An adult woman was berating her daughter, making demands about her clothing, and threatening the other parents who tried to intervene. Maria Martinez had spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney, specializing in discrimination cases. She had fought battles against school districts that failed to protect vulnerable students, employers who created hostile work environments, and institutions that used their power to marginalize and humiliate people. She recognized institutional bullying when she saw it, and she was witnessing her own daughter being victimized by someone who clearly believed their position of authority placed them above accountability. As Maria drew closer, she could see Bella standing in the center of the group, wrapped in a towel and crying. The sight of her daughter's distress triggered something primal and protective that transcended her professional demeanor. "What exactly is going on here?" The voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Every head turned toward the new arrival, and several parents visibly relaxed as they recognized Bella's mother. Karen, however, was too caught up in her power trip to immediately register the significance of Maria's presence. "Ma'am, this is a private HOA matter. Your daughter was dressed inappropriately for community use, and I was explaining the standards that all residents must follow." Maria's eyes swept over the scene, taking in every detail with the trained observation skills of a seasoned litigator. Her daughter, tears streaming down her face, standing in a perfectly appropriate swimsuit. A group of parents looking uncomfortable and ashamed. An angry woman in HOA attire standing in an aggressive posture. "I'm Maria Martinez, Bella's mother, and I'm very interested in hearing about these standards you mentioned." Karen finally seemed to register that this was not just another intimidated parent she could bully into submission. Something in Maria's tone and bearing suggested a woman accustomed to confronting authority figures who overstepped their bounds. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president. I was simply explaining to your daughter that her choice of swimwear wasn't appropriate for our family-friendly community space." Maria walked over to Bella and knelt down, speaking quietly. "Baby, are you okay? What happened here?" Through her tears, Bella managed to explain the confrontation, the demands to remove her clothing, and the public humiliation she had endured. With each word, Maria's expression grew colder and more focused. When Bella finished, Maria stood and turned back to Karen with the controlled fury of a professional advocate who had just witnessed a clear violation of her client's rights. Except this time, the client was her own child. "Ms. Whitmore, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You demanded that my 10-year-old daughter remove portions of her swimsuit in public because you deemed her body type inappropriate for community viewing." Karen, sensing the danger but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on her position. "I asked her to cover up appropriately. The HOA has standards, and all residents must comply with them. Show me the specific bylaw that gives you the authority to make such demands. The challenge was delivered with the precision of a cross-examination. Karen fumbled with her phone again, scrolling through the same sections she had searched earlier, finding nothing that could reasonably support her actions. The overall community standards are clear, even if they're not spelled out in exact detail. Maria's smile was sharp and professional. I see. So, you're interpreting non-existent rules to justify humiliating a child based on your personal discomfort with her body type. That's very interesting. The other parents began to understand that they were witnessing something significant. Maria Martinez wasn't just an angry mother. She was clearly someone with the knowledge and skills to hold Karen accountable for her actions. I don't think you understand who you're dealing with, Karen said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. I have significant influence in this community. I can make life very difficult for residents who don't cooperate with board decisions. Maria's laugh was cold and humorless. Ms. Whitmore, I'm a civil rights attorney specializing in discrimination cases. I've spent the last 15 years fighting institutions that abuse their power to marginalize vulnerable people. So I think I understand exactly who I'm dealing with, and, more importantly, I think you're about to understand who you're dealing with. The color drained from Karen's face as the implications hit her. She had just publicly humiliated the child of a civil rights attorney, demanding that a minor remove clothing in front of witnesses based on discriminatory body shaming. Every word of the confrontation had been witnessed by multiple parents who could testify to her actions. Now I'm sure this was all a misunderstanding, Karen said, her voice suddenly much smaller. Perhaps I was a bit overzealous in enforcing community standards. Maria stepped closer, her professional composure never wavering. Oh, I don't think this was a misunderstanding at all. I think this was a deliberate act of harassment and discrimination against a child, carried out by someone who believed their position of authority made them untouchable. She turned to address the assembled parents. I want to thank those of you who spoke up in defense of my daughter. Your courage in the face of intimidation means more than you know. Then she turned back to Karen. As for you, Ms. Whitmore, I'll be filing complaints with the appropriate authorities regarding your conduct today. What you did constitutes harassment of a minor and potentially child endangerment. Your demands that my daughter remove clothing in public crossed legal lines that you clearly don't understand. Karen was fully in retreat mode now, but her years of bullying behavior had created habits that were difficult to break. You can't threaten me. I have rights as HOA president. Maria's smile was predatory. You absolutely have rights, Ms. Whitmore. You have the right to an attorney, because you're going to need one. What you don't have is the right to abuse your position to harass children. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Maria spent the evening documenting everything that had occurred, collecting witness statements from the parents who had been present, and researching the legal precedents for her case. Her law firm's specialty in civil rights violations gave her access to resources and expertise that Karen had never imagined she might face. By morning, Maria had a comprehensive legal strategy that addressed both the individual harassment of her daughter and the broader pattern of abuse of power that Karen had demonstrated during her tenure as HOA president. At precisely 9 o'clock the following morning, Maria stood on the steps of the Maple Creek Commons HOA building, flanked by 2 colleagues from her law firm and facing a growing crowd of residents who had heard about the previous day's events. Word travels fast in close-knit communities, especially when it involves children being mistreated by authority figures. Parents who had never met Bella personally were outraged by the accounts they had heard. Residents who had their own negative experiences with Karen's authoritarian management style saw this as an opportunity to finally hold her accountable. Maria's voice carried clearly across the assembled crowd as she addressed the community. Yesterday, my 10-year-old daughter was subjected to harassment, discrimination, and public humiliation by your HOA president. Ms. Whitmore demanded that a child remove her clothing in public because she deemed my daughter's body type inappropriate for community viewing. A murmur of outrage rippled through the crowd. Even residents who hadn't been present the previous day were shocked by the blatant cruelty of Karen's actions. This behavior represents not just a personal attack on my family, but a fundamental abuse of the power that this community entrusted to Ms. Whitmore. Today, I am announcing legal action against both Ms. Whitmore personally and the HOA organization that enabled her conduct. The crowd erupted in applause. Residents who had suffered years of Karen's petty tyrannies, arbitrary rule enforcement, and intimidation tactics finally saw hope for change. Maria continued. The charges will include harassment of a minor, discrimination based on physical characteristics, abuse of authority, and creating a hostile environment for families in this community. Additionally, we will be pursuing a civil rights violation lawsuit that addresses the broader pattern of discriminatory enforcement that has characterized Ms. Whitmore's tenure. From inside the HOA building, Karen watched through a window as her world crumbled around her. The authority she had wielded like a weapon was about to be turned against her by someone who understood the legal system far better than she ever had. The police arrived within the hour. The complaint that Maria had filed detailed not just the harassment of her daughter, but also the public endangerment aspects of demanding that a minor remove clothing in front of a crowd. The officers who had taken the report recognized the serious nature of the allegations and moved quickly to investigate. Karen's arrest was witnessed by dozens of residents who had gathered to show their support for the Martinez family. As she was led away in handcuffs, many people were recording the scene on their phones. The woman who had terrorized the community through abuse of power was finally being held accountable for her actions. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Maria's documentation was thorough. Her witness statements were compelling, and the evidence of discriminatory behavior was overwhelming. Karen's defense attorney advised her to accept a plea agreement that included community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and a permanent restraining order that prohibited her from any contact with the Martinez family. But the criminal charges were only the beginning. The civil rights lawsuit that Maria filed on behalf of all affected residents exposed years of discriminatory practices, selective rule enforcement, and harassment of community members who didn't conform to Karen's narrow vision of acceptable behavior. The HOA organization itself was found liable for failing to provide adequate oversight of their board president and for enabling a pattern of discriminatory conduct. The resulting settlement required a complete restructuring of the HOA's governance, mandatory civil rights training for all board members, and the establishment of an independent oversight committee to prevent future abuses of power. 3 months later, Bella Martinez returned to the community sprinkler park wearing the same navy blue swimsuit that had sparked the confrontation. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Children played freely in the water, their parents relaxed and chatting nearby, no longer watching anxiously for signs of arbitrary rule enforcement or administrative harassment. The new HOA board, elected in an emergency vote that saw the highest turnout in the community's history, had implemented transparent policies and fair enforcement procedures. The days of one person wielding unchecked authority over their neighbors' lives were over. Bella splashed through the sprinklers with renewed confidence, her earlier trauma gradually healing as she experienced the community support that should have been there from the beginning. The other children welcomed her back with the uncomplicated acceptance of childhood friendships, and their parents made sure she knew she was valued and protected. Maria often reflected on the events that had transformed their community. Her daughter's ordeal had been painful and unnecessary, but it had also exposed a system of abuse that had been harming families for years. By standing up to Karen's bullying, they had created positive change that would benefit future generations of children who deserve to play freely without fear of adult prejudice and discrimination. The Civil Rights Settlement funded new playground equipment, upgraded community facilities, and established a scholarship program for local children pursuing education in law, social justice, and community service. Karen's legacy of fear and intimidation had been replaced by investments in the community's future. On warm summer afternoons, when the sprinklers activated automatically at 2 o'clock and children's laughter filled the air, Maria sometimes paused to watch from the parking area. Her daughter and her friends played with uninhibited joy, their bodies moving freely through the water without shame or self-consciousness. It was exactly as childhood should be, free from the prejudices and cruel judgments of adults who had forgotten what it meant to see through the eyes of innocence. The community had learned an important lesson about the difference between leadership and bullying, between maintaining standards and imposing personal biases on others. Karen Whitmore's name became a cautionary tale in communities throughout the region, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked and discrimination is allowed to masquerade as policy. Her actions had consequences that extended far beyond her own downfall, creating legal precedents that would protect other children from similar harassment in the future. But the most important victory was smaller and more personal. A 10-year-old girl had learned that standing up to bullies, even adult bullies in positions of authority, was not only possible, but necessary. She had seen her community rally around her family when it mattered most, and she had witnessed the power of legal advocacy to create meaningful change. As Bella grew older, she would carry these lessons with her. The trauma of that summer afternoon would always be part of her story, but so would the strength she discovered in its aftermath. She learned that courage could be contagious, that justice was worth fighting for, and that sometimes it takes a child's innocence to reveal the ugliness that adults learn to tolerate. The sprinklers continued their gentle rotation, casting rainbow prisms in the afternoon sunlight, and children continued to play with the unburdened joy that every childhood deserves. In Maple Creek Commons, at least, the lesson had been learned: power without compassion is tyranny, and a community's strength is measured by how it protects its most vulnerable members. The story of Karen Whitmore's downfall spread throughout the region, becoming a powerful reminder that accountability can come from unexpected places. Sometimes justice arrives not through the gradual processes of institutional change, but through the fierce protectiveness of a mother who refuses to let her child be diminished by someone else's prejudice. And sometimes, that's exactly the kind of justice the world needs most.